let's welcome our visiting professor today, Mr. Stephen Cleary, an expert in development for many, many years, almost 30 years now. And he was the founder of the legendary Arista Development Workshops, characterized as a center of excellence by the European Commission, and ran for more than 10 years, produced many films, many awarded films. And then Stephen joined the forces of the British Film Institute as the head of development there. And also during his time there, many films were developed, produced, and also won many, many awards. So, Stephen, thank you for joining us. We welcome you, and we thank you very much for accepting to be presenting your and sharing your expertise on development. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk for about 50 minutes or so, 55 minutes, then we're going to have a short break.
And then we're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume again.
Okay. So I suppose if people have questions, do we have time for questions at any point, or do we?
Yes, at the end.
Okay. All right. So if you have questions, please, make a note, and I'll try and get through as many as I can. So we're here to talk about development, and I think I have a number of slides I'm going to take you through because I think it's easier to be looking at those slides and then thinking about things as we look at them. So the first thing to do is to think about what development is. If we're going to be talking about development, what actually is it made of, and how does it work? Okay, and so to think about development, first of all, the important thing to understand about development is that fundamentally it's about a collaboration, a process of collaboration. What we're talking about is the things you do in order to get a project to production and then to an audience. Now, people often will use the phrase, taking the project, as it were, to market, but it's not really about that. Development is the activity you take that means if a project becomes a story, which then goes all the way down the line to getting an audience. And that involves the process of making the story work, the creative process of developing the story, but it's also a process of developing a project through the various financing stages that it has to go through in order to get the finance together. And then once you have that, developing the project further, and so that it can reach the audience that you have aimed, that you've intended it to reach. So my definition here is very broad. It's in a collaboration where a creative team, and that team is made up normally of a producer, can be more than one producer, director, a writer or writers, depending on what kind of project it is. And sometimes, of course, you can have other people involved in that process. The further along the project goes, the more closer to production you get, the more other collaborators come on board. Obviously, when you go into pre-production, then a whole bunch of other people start to give their input into the story, and things are changing all the time, which is another important thing to understand. So it's a collaboration where a creative team evolves, and this is an important word also. It doesn't, it's a story that is evolving and changing as the process goes on, reacting to the things that are happening to the project as time passes, evolving a dramatically exciting story which attracts interest and investment for the story. So part of your job in development is not just to create a story which will work for an audience, but also to know what it is about the story that is going to attract investors, distributors, the money to make the thing happen in the first place. And quite often that's in some sense a separate process, a process of presenting a project for the financing and then presenting the project for the audience is different. You're emphasizing different things and looking at different areas. And so in order to create the interest and the investment in the project, you have to take the story, a story, through a process of scripting, which is continual. This doesn't end when the financing is arrived at. The process is evolving all the time through pre-production, through production, through post-production, because you're evolving and developing the story. If you're the producer in particular, you're developing the story when you edit it. You know, you're still changing the story, you're still changing the emphasis. Similarly, the director is going to be doing this. The writer may well be left behind in that process, or they can be involved in that also. So the story is evolving all the time. And that's the important thing to understand. It's not just what you do before you get the money, which is a kind of a simplistic idea of what development involves. It's a far more complex process with far more stages involved in it. So you're taking the project all the way down the line, developing it through its scripting and financing and production and distribution until it's delivered. And then it's put in front of an audience. And all the way through that process, the team that is doing the developing is changing as time passes. It grows and it shrinks. Again, once you've gone through the production phase, your job as a member of that team is to ensure the story is brought together, is realized in a way that's true to the vision that you had for it, and which enables a story to reach an audience. And one of the things that happens often in development is that a project kind of loses its way, that the project can quite often get made, but when you get to the end of the process, the project you have simply isn't very good. Quite often, the difficulty of going through the various stages of development, they all kind of have an effect on the story. And if you're not in control of the story, and if you're not really clear what it is you're trying to do, then along the line of developing the story, you will be given literally dozens of different opinions on the story. Lots of different perspectives from different people will say, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? What about this? What if we did this? And you have to make a series of decisions about whether or not to pay any attention to those suggestions, those comments. Now, the question is, well, on what basis do you make the decision? How do you know whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, whether you should pay any attention or not? And the answer is you have to have a clear idea before those opinions arrive as to what it is you're trying to do. And you measure those opinions or those perspectives against your vision for the project. And if they turn away from where you're headed, then the decision to take an account of that opinion, to change the story, is a decision to turn away from the vision that you had. Very often in development, when these sorts of changes start to happen, you find a project being pointed this way and then that way and then this way from various opinions, until the people making the project, the key people, lose sight of what it is they were trying to do in the first place. That's what happens to a story that doesn't really succeed once it's produced. It loses, the people involved have lost their vision for what the story is. If you manage to keep that vision coherent, it will change and it will adapt and evolve. But if you have a clear vision that you can keep true to all the way down the line, then if your development is successful, if the project is made, then this process will not only teach you about development, because you've become more experienced in the process, you'll be hopefully better at it next time. It will also significantly improve your professional prospects in your career, because most projects in development don't make it all the way down the line. Most projects fail. So having succeeded in all of this, if you manage to take it all the way down the line, your next project should be easier for various reasons. You're more experienced, you know more people, you have more contacts, all these various things that happen as you evolve your project. And in theory, your next project is going to be simpler. Not always. Sometimes it gets more difficult because you choose a different project and the ideas and the ways you did the first project don't apply precisely for the second project. But in general, the more success you have in development, the more likely you are to have success in development next time. So your intention, your aim in development is to get things into production, because that's an indication of progress. And the more you do it, the easier you will find it gets. But the truth is that most projects and most story development fails, in the sense that it doesn't reach an audience. It doesn't get. It's something like, it's difficult to say what the precise proportion is, because it changes depending on what kind of story you're telling and what medium, what country you're in, etc. But you can generally reckon that it's somewhere between 1 in 8 and 1 in 20 projects will make it, broadly speaking. So as a producer, for example, if you work with that proportion, you say, okay, 1 in 8 of my projects will go, because on average that's what they do, which is quite a low average. I have to say, this could easily be higher. What that means is, if you're thinking about your career as a producer, that for every 8 projects you have, only 1 will go. So if you're developing 2 projects only, then you have got a very slim chance of either of those projects going, given that you've got another 6 you should be developing. In order to get your 1 in 8, you have to be developing 8. If you're only developing 2, your chances of those going to production are not 1 in 2. Your chances are extremely slim. You're basically turning your back on 3/4 of your possible opportunities to get a project in development. So as a producer, one of the things you have to say to yourself is, well, if I make the decision to only develop, say, 1 project or 2 projects, I have to organize my life and my finances in such a way that I must be prepared for failure, because it's almost certain that that's not going to work. So the question then becomes, where you get money from? How are you going to keep getting money? And the more important question probably is, how are you going to stop yourself from getting too depressed when you fail continuously for year after year? Because most people who fail at one thing for a long time give up. And that's the truth about most people in film and television who don't succeed in development. Eventually they just stop because it's too depressing and they run out of money. So you have to look at this in an organized way. If the proportion is 1 in 8 for feature films, for example, then as a producer, are you developing 8 projects? Because if you're not, you're making things harder for yourself. Another thing I often point out in feature films, not so much for television, but it's also true for television drama series, is the proportion of adaptations versus original work. If you look at feature films, it's something over, broadly speaking, it changes again country to country, but it's broadly speaking somewhere between 50 and 60% of produced feature films are adaptations of stories that have originally appeared in a different medium, which is to say more than half of the feature films that are produced are adaptations. If you're a producer and you have a slate of projects, are you making the decision to have half of your projects adaptations? Because if you're not, you're turning your back on half the available slots for projects, because half of them will be adaptations. So as a producer, one of the first things I ask a young producer is, how many projects are you doing that are adaptations? Normally the answer is none, because they haven't thought of that, because it seems easier to find writers and projects, for themselves. And then I say, okay, well, that means that half the projects that are going to get made next year, you're not going to be part of, because half of those projects are going to be adaptations and you don't have any. So you're now aiming your little slate of projects at half the available financing opportunities that there are, because you have no adaptations. Okay, so again, when you think about development as a producer, you have to be methodical and organized. You have to understand the world, the universe of development that you live in and work in. And you don't just follow an enthusiasm. I mean, you have to be enthusiastic within the context of the world you live in, but you also have to be sensible and understand in detail the world you're in. Again, the more you do it, the more you start to understand these things, the better you will get it. So what you should be doing as you fail in development, which is what will happen to most of you most of the time, okay, and if you don't like the idea of that, stop doing development, because it's not going to get any better. It's always going to be the same. As you go through development with your list of projects, most of which will fail, the question you have to ask yourself about each of the projects that fails is, what have I learned from that process? What will I do next time that I should have done this time, but I didn't know, but now I do? What have I learned from it? It's inevitable that projects will fail. What isn't inevitable is that people will learn from the failure. So you have to always be aware of, okay, I'm going to have to learn something from this in order that I don't make the same mistake again. Sometimes it's not even a mistake. Sometimes fashions change. Sometimes you're developing a project and you suddenly discover that someone else is developing a similar project and they're ahead of you by a year in terms of the work they've done. So your project has no chance, because if that project is going, your project will die. So sometimes what you learn is you didn't know enough about what other people around you were doing. You made a decision to develop something, not doing enough research, for example. Sometimes you can't help it, it just happens. Sometimes you're just unlucky. But if you fail all the time, if you fail for 5 years, you don't get anything going in 5 years, I would suggest that the problem you may have is that you're not learning enough. That problem the thing you need to learn may be that you shouldn't go to those places that you're going to for development money. For example, if you keep getting turned down, one of the issues is, well, maybe there must be other places you could go to. You have to be flexible and imaginative and explore yourself. So development and the process of development, it's not part of screenwriting. It's not part of directing, and it's not part of producing. It's an activity in itself. It's a craft in itself. And if you think about it, if you add up the number of weeks or hours that a producer or a director or a writer, a screenwriter spends in either development, production, or post-production, the answer is they all spend the vast majority of their life in development. So of the activities that producers, directors, and writers do, development is the one that you do the most. Okay, just in terms of time, the time you spend. It's also, if you're not in production or not in post-production, you're getting paid less for doing that than you are getting paid for when you're in production and when you're in post-production. Well, the producers are laughing because they know they're not getting paid at any of it, you know, all the way through, but you know what I mean. So you're going to spend more time doing this. And if you don't do it well, you won't get to do production, and you won't get to do post-production, and you won't get to the market, and you won't get to an audience, and you won't get to a festival, you know, and your work will not be seen. So, you know, it's an important area of activity. And when you look at it in more detail, then you then break it down into kind of specializations that we have: feature film stories, a TV drama series, documentaries, genre stories, which are, you know, spread across television and drama, and indeed documentary. Adaptations, which is a separate kind of activity. It's, you know, many of the things are the same as a different kind of normal development of a story, but there are specific things about adaptation. If you're going to do adaptations, 50% of the available market, then, you know, what are the specific things you need to know about adaptations? For example, what you specifically need to know about adapting a novel for a TV drama series? What would be 5 good things to know about that before you started doing it? This is what I mean about it being a separate craft. Is you shouldn't just work out the solution when you're writing. You shouldn't just work out the solution once you've bought the rights to the novel. For example, you need to be aware of these things and think about these things before you do it. Developing low budget feature films or television is a different kind of activity which works in a different way than if you're developing standard or high budget feature films or television. So the level of money, the amount of budget that you have that you can afford to spend also affects the practice of development, the way you do it. In low budget, you don't have very much money, which means you don't have very much time. So if you don't have very much time, you need a development process which is much quicker than it would be in other circumstances. So you need to understand how do you make it much quicker? What do you do? The answer is you do very much less writing. For example, you don't do 6 drafts of the script because you don't have the time or the money to do it. So you need to find projects that don't need that kind of money if you're doing low budget development. Okay, so, you know, and you have to work out, well, what does that mean? And that's a long, complicated discussion we will have another time. Developing online series is different from developing features. It's different developing television. There are certain things that you need to be more aware of. They're going to be shorter, generally speaking. You're going to be working with short episodes. So what's the difference between a story told in 12 minutes or 18 minutes per episode than a story told in 40 minutes or an hour in TV drama, etc.? Computer games, a whole different world altogether, where development is absolutely mostly what they do, but it's much better funded than normal development is in the other kind of areas. Computer game development it's essentially not very different from production. It's a kind of evolved production process which they call development. So it's a very different process, working with very different kind of principles. But again, some of these principles transfer across. Some of them are specific and stay with the activity that you're dealing with. So what are the principles then we need to think about when it comes to development? Well, the first one is that it's not just a creative activity. It's a creative activity that involves economics and involves management of time and people. So it's a mixture of things. Your creativity is never isolated and alone. And if you let it get isolated and alone, you kind of lose touch with the reality of it. It's quite easy for people to think, oh, I love working on this story. We'll go away to a house in the mountains for 5 days, or we'll just work on the story, because that's what development is. That's kind of what development is some of the time, but most of the time development is much less glamorous and involves a blending of the different elements. Okay. The other thing to understand is that half of what development is about listening to other people, about keeping a team together and making sure that team communicates and organizes itself properly. You know, most projects, in my experience in development, that fail not because the story doesn't work, and not because the idea couldn't, if it was done well, be a good project. They fail because the people involved in the team together get fed up with working on the project. It just becomes too hard. You know, and eventually what happens is I say to people, I see them afterwards, what happened to that project you were doing? And they kind of go, oh, well, you know, we just kind of, my director got something else, and, you know, so she had to go. And then, we tried it for a while, but then something else came along and I got involved in that. What they're really saying is none of us were that committed to the project. we kind of gave up on it, and then we all went elsewhere. We all went and found other things to do. That's what I mean about the problem in development. That's the reason projects fail, because the team folds in on itself and gives up. They lose the enthusiasm and commitment to the project. And that management of the team to make sure that enthusiasm and commitment stays at a high enough level to drive the project forward is the primary responsibility of the producer during development. Your job is to make the team work and work well, and find out, how your team works, and make sure you can organize the working of the team properly. Okay, so, and that involves a lot of listening and a lot of talking, and you need to be good at talking and good at listening and good at managing the team. If you're a writer, you need to be very good at listening to a producer talk about your work, and to be able to take out from what they say the interesting and useful things that you can use in order to get the story better, and ignore many of the things they say that are not useful. So you have to listen well. You have to listen to a critique and understand how to do that. Nobody is automatically good at development. It's not, oh, I'm just brilliant at this. It's something that everyone has to learn how to do. And the problem with development, and the problem with scripts, full stop, is that the biggest issue is that anyone who can read thinks their opinion on a script is useful and interesting. Okay, it's always a problem in development, because people can read. They think their opinion on what they read is worth something and is useful, and it mostly isn't. It's like saying, because I know how to drive a car, I could drive a Formula One car. You couldn't. You know nothing about driving a Formula One car. Driving and driving a Formula One car are entirely different activities. And when you get into a Formula One car, you would know immediately that whatever I know about driving is not going to be very useful here. But when people read scripts, they think, okay, well, I can read. I've read stories. Therefore, my opinion on this story and my opinion on what needs to happen to it is useful. And it's not. Okay, if you're reading a script, just because you have an opinion, it doesn't mean anything. Everyone has an opinion. Having an opinion on a script is not developing it. It's just having an opinion on a script. Development is a specific and different process. You have to learn how to do it. And learning how to read is the first part. Okay, but we're assuming that everyone comes to development with the ability to read. Once you've got over that, okay, it's not such a great skill in development. It's not something to boast about. So in terms of, I've read your script and this is what I think. Okay, a good writer will close their ears at that point and ask yourself a question: should I be listening to this? Why am I listening to this now? What use am I going to make of this critique right now? And if the answer, you can't answer and this question is positively, then you shouldn't listen. You shouldn't have that conversation, and you shouldn't talk too much about your script to people who are not involved in the development of it. You should be careful about separating out the process of developing your story from talking about your story with your friends, and don't confuse the two, because they're quite different. Writing a screenplay is not developing it, it's just writing a draft. Reading a script is not developing it, it's just reading a draft. Because you write doesn't mean you're good at development. I've met many writers who are terrible at development, but are really good writers. Okay, but if I say, okay, well, what about this? And they go, yeah, that's a good point. How would I change that? What should I do? And I go, what do you think? And they go, I don't know. A good writer will say, if they don't know, I don't know. It's okay, we can talk about that. Let's discuss it. Let's find a way to do it. Okay, just because you're good at writing doesn't mean you're good at development. Just because you're good at writing a treatment doesn't mean you're good at writing a script. The writers listening here will know this. Okay, so being a good screenwriter does not necessarily mean you're a good developer of your own work or of other people's work. There are things you have to learn that are not to do with how you write, they're to do with how you develop, and they're not the same thing. Similarly, a director. I've met many directors who are extremely good at development, and I've met some directors who are terrible at it, and they make every project they work on worse, and other people have to come along behind them and fix what they've done. Okay, because you can direct well does not mean you can develop well. It's a separate skill. Okay, so all of us have to go into this process with a little bit of humility. It involves an emotional involvement as well as a kind of a technical understanding, because you're dealing with emotion, because you're dealing with a story that's being told to an audience. The object of telling a story to an audience, I hope, is to involve the audience emotionally in the story. That you want the audience to be pulled in and emotionally commit to the story you're telling them. So what you're in the business of is developing a story that has emotional content. Well, if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to measure the effect of the emotional content on yourself, to see how you feel about the work. And when you're collaborating with other people, you're going to have to compare your emotional responses within the team with each other and relate it to the material. So you're going to have to become good and fluent at dealing with your emotional response to material. Okay, so you can't be unemotional about development. But at the same time, you can't be too emotional about development because it's a technical process. Okay, you test the working of the story out on yourself and other people in your team, and you understand, if you're working with a writer, that their job is, as it were, moving the emotions of the audience around. That's one description of a writer's process, a writer's job. The job of the writer is to emotionally manipulate the audience in order to give them an enjoyable experience through the telling of a story. So your writer is dealing in emotion all the time. A conversation with a writer is therefore always going to be a conversation that has an emotional aspect to it. And this is where things get complicated, because for the producer, you're going to be dealing with people, directors, but in particular writers, who are dealing in this emotional content, who are going to have to basically take their own emotional responses to the world, put those emotional responses into the stories they tell, and then have conversations with other people about the emotional responses that they're dealing with, the emotional things that they are putting into the story. That conversation for the writer is always going to be an emotional conversation. Anyone talking to a writer has to be emotionally sensitive, because the writer is, as it were, bringing themselves to the work. And a conversation about a good story with a good writer is always a personal conversation. It's a conversation that the writer has an emotional commitment to, and it's hard for them to talk about. And you need to be sensitive to the emotional effect that a conversation about a story has on a writer. You can't just walk in and, again, you see this happen with people who've not been doing development very long. They're going to walk in and say things, and I look across the room at the writer, and the writer looks as if someone just hit them on the head with a baseball bat. The comment that has been given to their work is so insensitively phrased, is said so badly, it has no account, as it were, of the emotional delicacy of the work for the writer, that the writer kind of shrinks away. You can see them in their seat, just shrinking away from this person. And if you do that twice or three times in 20 minutes, the conversation is over. The writer's not going to listen to you anyway. It's too difficult. You're making the conversation too difficult. And so you're not going to be able to make anything good happen, because the writer's not going to listen. They're too busy protecting themselves emotionally. If you're not sensitive to the process of a conversation about a story with a writer, then you need to make yourself sensitive to it. You need to watch people who are really good at it doing it, and see how they talk to a writer, and see how you pull a writer and relax them and get the writer interested in the conversation, so that they don't worry so much about whether or not the emotion that they feel about the story is coming across properly. And once a writer relaxes, you can have a real conversation. So you're going to be dealing, if you're a producer, for example, in emotional responses and emotional support as much as you are with physical support and financial support. So your emotions are always going to be involved. You must measure the emotional effect the story has on you, and you must be sensitive to the emotional effect of telling the story and retelling the story and rewriting the story has on the writer. Okay. One of the things about a critique, for example, one of the things, if you write notes on a script, or if you sit in a room with a writer, you talk about their work, is that what you do in that situation is you mainly say what you don't think works. The things that you think need to be talked about. So any critique, written notes or a story conversation with the writer tend to be, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this needs to be better, and I'm not sure about this. So basically what you're saying to a writer, the subtext of your conversation to a writer is, you're failing, you're failing, you're failing, you're failing, you're failing. Imagine going out for a drink with a friend of yours. The friend says, I want to tell you a few things about, we've been friends for years now. I just want to tell you a few things. You're not good at this. 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 And you're not good at this. And anyway, by the way, I do know you very well. You aren't good at that either. And you're also not very good at that. Imagine that conversation if you were at the other end. Imagine how you would slowly shrink away from your friend, because they're right. The things they're saying are really good because they know you well and they're making a good critique. But one after another, these critiques basically push you into a state of kind of emotional numbness, because it's hard for anyone to listen to endless criticism, no matter how good the criticism is. no matter how accurate it is, time and time again. That's what happens when you talk to a writer about their work. You are making an endless series of negative comments about what they've done. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that when you do that, the writer's going to close this down and starts to become less, as it were, open to any discussion about their work. You have to find a way of talking to a writer which gets you through the conversation, but at the same time allows the writer to relax and allows the conversation to become more fluid and more sensitive to what's going on. Mostly, this is solved by talking about the meeting to the writer, saying, what are we doing in this meeting? We're going to be doing this. We're going to be talking about these things. You're probably going to feel bruised by this. I'm probably going to say things to you that I don't mean to sound as crude or as brutal as they will sound to you. It's probably going to happen. When that happens, can you tell me? And I'll rephrase it, or I'll apologize, and we can do it again, and we can start a different way. Or if it's getting too much for you, we can break this meeting into maybe 2 or 3 meetings. We can have some today, come back in a couple of days and do some more, come back in a couple of days and do some more. So we don't have to do it all in the one go. You can work out a way together of doing this process. And it's the insensitivity with which you do that that makes the difference between a really good developer and a really not so good developer. And for producers, this is a particularly important skill. There are certain producers, very successful producers, who are really successful because they are really good at talking to talent, particularly writers. They get really good relationships with writers. Writers enjoy working with them, and directors are the same. They enjoy working with them. And the producer has this ability to go through this creative process and make it not pleasurable, but make it exciting and stimulating for the people they're working with. Writers talk to each other, always. If you're a producer who gets a reputation for being really good with writers, other writers that work with them will tell their writer friends, you should work with this person, this producer. They're really good. It's really good fun. It's really enjoyable. And you will find over time as a producer, writers bringing their work to you. So rather than you having to go out and find good work, if you do this well, good work will come to you. And if you're a producer who continually struggles to get projects made and struggles to find material, if you've been working for a few years, then you might look at this area of your own work and say, is it the case that writers are going back to their other writer friends and saying, it's actually quite tough working with them? I mean, he's a nice guy, she's a nice guy, but not good on script, not good at talking about story. It's a struggle. They don't really get it. They don't really understand how to talk. If they're having those kind of conversations about you, that's why you're not getting the work. So this is really important for your prospects as a producer. So what development teaches us is how to get better professionally, because all these skills make us better professionals. It teaches us how to work in partnership. It teaches us what to look for in a good story. It teaches us how to make things better fast. And it also always puts us in relationship to the economics, the development economics. How do you get money for development? How do you get this project to move further forward? What is the economic reality of the world you live in? And do you accept that reality and work within it? Or do you go somewhere else? Do you say, well, I'm going to change the reality. I'm going to go to a different world, because that's always an option for you. So it's a mixed process, balancing different objectives and different needs. There's a story, there's a team you have to manage, and often you have a bunch of different opinions and views from a lot of different people. Some of them are financiers, some of them are agency people, some of them are actors, for example, who you might be wanting to work with, some agents, you might be working, all these different kinds of people involved in the process. They're all feeding their opinions back in, and somehow you have to manage that massive opinions so that you can get a clear sense of where you want to be and what you need to be paying attention to. The story is going to change, and that change also has to be managed. It's not going to be the same. Stories change all the time because of the reality. The writer has an idea of a story, okay, and they write it on their own. For example, they write a draft, they give it to a producer. The producer goes, okay, how do I take this story to the market? How do I get money for it? How do I push it further to the market? I have to take it to these people. What are they looking for? They're looking for this. They're not looking for this project. They're looking broadly for this. How does this particular project fit in with the broad demands of these financiers? Okay, do I need to change it a little to move it in that direction? How do I talk to the writer about moving it a little in the direction in such a way that the writer finds that idea exciting and doesn't go, well, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, how do I make them commit to the idea and make it interesting and write well for that? And it's going to shift again. Later on, an actor comes on. an actor reads it, you know, a lot further down the line. The actor has lots of opinions, and that actor is going to be the difference between the film getting financed and not getting financed. Okay, so you can't ignore the actor. So how, as the producer, do you bring in the actor's opinion and view to the writer and manage that process? Not so the writer goes, oh, if that's what I have to do to get the project made, then I'll do it. That's not what you want. You want to present the opinion and the writer and the actor to each other in such a way that they find the process of collaborating exciting. That, wow, we can do such good things that I hadn't thought of, because until this woman came along, this actress, and said those things, I hadn't thought of it like that, but now I have. That's really good. That's interesting. Look at what we can do. That's the emotion you want to generate. The producer is in charge of this process of making sure creatively the project is always charged and exciting. Okay, so, and it's going to evolve and it's going to change. Both writers and producers have to realize that a project always changes in development. It never stays the same. And you have to manage that kind of process. You have to deal with the financing realities, the casting realities, the production realities. I have a project on my desk right now. I had an email this morning from the producer in Australia. Today is the second day of pre-production of this project. They have to take 11 pages out of the script. This is a script they've worked on, we've worked on for 2 years. Okay, and we have got 3 days to take 11 pages out of the script. And if you look at it, you know, 11 pages, well, if we take any 11 pages out, we're going to break the story into a different shape. And it's how are we going to do that? That's a production reality. It's not a question of, you know, if we don't do it properly, we might as well just take 11 pages out, you know, at random and throw them away. There are going to be 11 less pages in 3 days' time, whatever happens. The question is, how do we do that best? Will it work perfectly? No, of course it won't work perfectly. It never works perfectly, because in production, you know, these things we have to hope that along the way there are other things that make things work better. Okay, but this is a kind of reality and development you get when you're at that level of the project, when the project is about to shoot and the production designer comes in and says, we cannot do this for the money we have unless we change the script. The script will be changed. Okay, and if the writer doesn't like that, get another writer. You know, you don't have time at that point to worry about the writer's feelings, because those pages are going to go one way or another. And so we all have to kind of get in and make it work. And we've got 3 days. When we started writing this project, we could take 4 months to talk about 11 pages. Now we have to do 3 days. These are the realities that shift and change as the project moves forward. And you have to know which of the realities you need to pay attention to, which ones you can fix in a different way. And at the same time, always remember that you're aiming at an audience, that it's not about what you want to do, it's what's best for the audience. So these 11 pages that have to come out, the question is, how do we take 11 pages out of the script and make the story better for the audience? Not keep it going, which is your first thing. How do we find a way of making the script better by taking 11 pages out? That's the question we need to be asking ourselves. So remember that you're always thinking from the perspective of the audience. You're representing. When I work with writers, I represent the audience's interests. I'm not interested in what the writer wants. I'm interested in what the audience wants. And I'm always saying to the writer, how will that be understood? How will that be understood? How will they understand that? How will they feel when they see that? I'm always trying to represent the audience's perspective to the writer. I'm not trying to make the writer feel good about themselves. I'm trying to get the writer to engage with the idea of the audience. Mostly they do all the time anyway. I'm just emphasizing that aspect for the process. So very quickly, because we don't have too much time, I'm going to, in 10 minutes, going to take you a quick tour of the development world. Okay, how development works around the world. I just want to show you it's not a one shape of business. It changes according to geography, it changes according to culture, it changes according to population size of the country that you're in. All these different things kind of hold. I just want to jump off the kind of general and look into the specific. Okay, there are different worlds in development, and it's a good thing to understand those different worlds and broadly how they operate before you think about development in too precisely. Okay, there are some places in the world where you have wholly private development economies, where there is no public money in development. Nigeria is a good example of this. India is another good example of this, and Hollywood is the most famous example of this. But there are plenty of countries around the world where this is also true. It's not just Hollywood. Okay, when you have a wholly privately funded development economy, where there's no public money in it, then the thing that drives the economy is the talent, is the star, is the people who can bring the audience to the project. Okay, so and the question then is, what brings the star? And that's often the answer to that is the director and money. and a really great script. So that's, you're looking for a talent commitment in the project, and in order to get a talent commitment, you need top class directors and really good projects. Okay, and money isn't important, because the economy is very much more powerful than many other film economies. So the fact that it might cost you $1 million to develop the project, it's not an issue in the way that it would be in other economies. Okay, this gives you an idea very briefly. It's kind of photograph of like a moment in time in the history of Hollywood development, the range of projects. There are around, when this was taken about 4 years ago, 12,000 projects in development in Hollywood at any one time. None of those projects in development have got a budget individually of any less than $250,000. Any one project, that would be the minimum. Okay, so you begin to see, when you think there's 11,000 projects, you begin to see the size of this economy. Half of those projects, just of them, are what you call in active development. 21% of those projects are kind of pushing towards the resolution. They're either going to get made or they're not. 8% are kind of hanging around in post-production, waiting for distributors to get rid of them, etc. About 0%, less than 1% are hold. 4% are in turnaround, have been abandoned, and 13% are inactive. They have been abandoned, but people aren't saying they've been abandoned. Okay, so about 17 or 18%, 20% roughly of projects are failing. And those projects are going to fall off. And of the next 53% that we see here, about 20% of those are also going to fall off next year. So there's a large amount of churn. And, in this system, quite a lot of projects get made because it's, it's a slightly more efficient development system than many other kind of systems. But you see the range of kind of how it kind of works, broadly speaking. Then you can see where they get their ideas from. And you begin to see the range of places, the different kind of material they use to get to this. They adapt TV series into features. They have original treatments, a small proportion. Theatre plays they take. They take spec scripts that are written without any, just submitted by a writer on the off chance. They take short films, they make them into feature films. They make sequels, they take original scripts. Just under half of the projects they take on are original scripts. What that means is the other half is not original. I talked about adaptations before. That's what I was talking about. The other half are adaptations of something or other, remakes, some verbal pitches, only done with massive stars. The verbal pitches are from their big stars coming in and talking about them, or the big directors. Range stuff, non-fiction, documentaries, magazine articles, wherever it might come from, non-fiction, books, biographies, that kind of stuff, games, small proportion, but very expensive normally when they make them. Big section of novels, some documentaries, and comics. Again, a small section, but very expensive when they choose to make them. Okay, that gives you some sense of the range of material that in this economy is picking up from. As a producer looking at this, or as a writer even, it's quite interesting. This is not, there's no reason why you shouldn't have this range of material to draw from in any feature film or television drama economy. And if you look at your own specific world and think, okay, well, we don't really do any of those apart from maybe 4, then there may be an opportunity there. What if you did some of those things that aren't, the things that you never do in, I don't know, in Greece or in Albania or in Scotland or wherever it may be? Just look at the work that's produced and say, well, how come we've never done any of those? What if we did? And see what happens. So as a producer, it gives you an interesting idea of the kind of range and complexity of it. In these worlds of private economies, you have very fast decision making. Okay, because there's a competition for projects, which means people in this system work very hard and very fast. It's very hard work. You work very long hours. You're paid a lot of money because you're working long hours. Mostly you keep things short. You will read a script, but other documents apart from a script will be short documents, really short. A page, half a page, 2 pages. You'll tend to work on really short documents because they can be written quickly. And there will be a kind of vocabulary that everyone involved in this process uses. So there's a kind of technical vocabulary, the story people in this system, and there will be a large number of them because there are all those projects to deal with, will all have to come up with a jargon and a kind of a shorthand for describing things. And everything becomes quite formulaic because it's like a factory that's churning out material. So everyone becomes very technical and they all have to talk the same language, because if they talked a different language, they wouldn't understand each other and it would take too long to explain, and they don't have the time to do that. So you have a kind of effect that pushes everything towards sameness in this system. Okay, it's a very high pressure world. Nobody works for nothing. Everyone is getting paid. Whenever is getting paid, they can pay good union fees because they're all getting good money. So when you have good union fees, you have very strong unions. So you have very strong agreements. So the structuring of the payments and the organization of contracts and all these things are very rigorous. So your writers' contracts are, you'll have agents representing writers, you'll have lawyers representing actors, you'll have agents, everyone has an agent. And there is enough money in the system to pay everyone. So everything becomes very professional and very complicated. Okay, what you get in this system is a highly professional system. These craft skills are extremely good, and the people within this system are extremely motivated. They motivate themselves. They don't have to be motivated by anyone on the outside. And they are looking for new and interesting ways of getting things done. They're a very creative system. They're technically curious. They want to know technically how we can make things better and different. So for example, just in screenwriting, you can sell hundreds of different titles of books about how to screenwrite to the Hollywood industry, because everyone involved in the development world, and I'm just talking about the development world of Hollywood, is interested technically in how do you talk about screenwriting. So there's an insatiable curiosity. You can make up anything. You can just say, okay, you have to think about screenwriting in relation to sheep. Think of sheep and think of how you manage flocks of sheep, and that's how you manage a story. And there'll be people in Hollywood who will buy the book, because it's a new system. They're technically curious. They'll look at it. They'll work out whether they think it's useful or not. If it's useful, they use it. If they won't, they'll throw it away. But they'll go to the next one. They're always curious. And knowledge is power. So gossip and conversation and connecting with people and always talking. Once you get into this kind of a world, these are the things that matter. Technical curiosity, an ability to, you have to do a lot of socializing, because there's a lot of information that you can get socially that you need to bring back to your work. You have to talk to each other all the time. So it's a very chatty world. The people in this world work very hard. They are extremely smart, but they're not very original. Okay, they're all like each other. They all think the same things. They read the same books. They're doing the same things. So they're very, very clever and work very hard, but they're not very good at being original thinkers. They devour information. They're not in development because they love development. They're in development because they're on the way to something else. So most of the people in this system want to be producers or executives, and you do kind of a few years in development in order to get yourself the kind of experience you need in order to move on. So they're always, in some sense, 1 foot outside. And they are fashionable. They follow trends. They're scared of being original because they might get it wrong, and if they get it wrong, they'll get fired. And that's the next point. They're going to get fired, and the fear of failure is one of the main motivators. In this system, it's not interested in risk. The whole system is geared and designed to minimize risk. So that's why stars are so important, because a star is a really good. It's not a guaranteed. It's not a guarantee against failure, but it's a really good, it's as close as you can get to a guarantee against failure. And certain stars will open, as I said, the film. Now, again, by the same reason, you won't want to go with first timers. Wherever you can, you will want to go with established talent. And in terms of material, that's why there's so much adaptation, because you're buying stuff to make into stories that has already been successful somewhere else. So you're minimizing the possibility of failure. And that fear of failure is behind the entire system. These people are very connected to the market, and they're aware of what works. And if they fail, they lose their jobs. And that fear of failure is extremely strong marketing. The trouble is, they'll lose their jobs anyway. 2 or 3 years, you get fired anyway, because the management changes. And when the management changes, they fire everyone and rehire. So it's a meritocracy. If you're good at your job, you'll do well. If you're not good or you're unlucky, you get fired. Eventually, you're going to get fired anyway. And you're looking to move on because these organizations are not going to be loyal to you. So you have no need to be loyal to the organizations you work for. Producers in this system have to understand how the system works. This is how it works, and to find a way of working within this system. It's the same is true of writers. The stories this system produces tend to be simple stories, and they tend to resemble each other. So the ideal hit is going to be easy to describe. Complicated stories become simpler as they're developed, and because creative staff change frequently, then the uniqueness of a project kind of gets washed out, because people will be working on a project in a certain direction, they'll all get fired or moved on or get a new job, and then a new person will come in and say, well, let's do it a different way. And this can happen 2 or 3 times to a project, and by the time that's finished, you've got nothing at all. It's just a completely messed up project, and you have to manage the different people that you meet in this system. television drama, an explosion of television drama, it's kind of changed Hollywood and this system. You can see it kind of broadly speaking, not just in Hollywood, this is having an effect all around Europe as well. It's because what happened when streamers came along and what happened when TV drama kind of took off at the beginning of this century is that suddenly we had long form stories in a way that we had had before, but there's a kind of revival and interest of long form stories that are told over many episodes. And and the amount of money that could be spent on the productions of these long form series was also got higher and higher and higher. So you have long form drama series that are competing in terms of production spend with big budget filmmaking. So they look as good. And the stories are richer and more complex because they can take longer to tell them. So Hollywood was then confronted with this big problem that you have these big expensive stories that look just as good as yours, and the stories are actually better because they take 20 hours to tell rather than 2 hours. And so you can go a lot further with the characters, you can twist and turn a lot more, everything can be as it were bigger and better and longer. And so what Hollywood then did is push towards a more formulaic storytelling, higher budget, even higher than the streamers can afford. So you have these huge, big budget kind of Marvel movies, and you make the Marvel movies a series like a television series. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe is simply, it's another kind of multi-form series. So the rise of the TV drama series kind of pushed high budget Hollywood cinema into kind of expensive fantasy sci-fi serial filmmaking. And at the other end, what it did is it made rough and ready filmmaking, what had previously been independent filmmaking, the kind of rough, raw storytelling, something they stopped making films in the middle budget and they started making films at a high budget or a low budget. The problem this is where it starts to get interesting for Europeans, is that suddenly independent cinema all across Europe had a rival for audiences, for the audiences that you're after, which is, and that rival is Hollywood. That rival is interesting films coming out of Hollywood with really high class writers and really high class directors and really high class actors and a really good production value, even at a low budget. And that begins and is squeezing independent filmmaking all across Europe, because now you've got really great indie movies being made by Hollywood and going through the Hollywood distribution mechanisms. And they're beginning to push out. You also have this other effect that streamers had, which is where you get streamers who are essentially filming films for streaming, but not for distribution, and then picking up every now and then a film that they want to win an award with. So they'll give that film a cinema distribution in order to try and get it nominated for international awards. And so again, you'll have a competition, as it were, for traditional indie filmmaking. And for features in particular, this is not for television, features in particular, this is a big problem, because as it were, the amount of films that the audience can see that have been given to the audience of this type, of an indie type, has increased. And there's been a large increase of English language indie films of a really high quality, because they have all this kind of high quality machinery behind them. And for independent filmmakers, people wanting to make cinema in Europe, this is a big, big issue. You have to, this is your competition, not your domestic, not your other Greek filmmakers or your other French filmmakers, these American independent films that are not independent, they're actually Hollywood, they look like independent. This is the competition that's going to take your audience away. So these are the stories you're competing with. So that's been a big effect, and it has had a big effect on development across Europe. Then you have the other side, wholly public developed economies, often in very small countries. Europe used to be like this, it's changed. You know, when I first started, you had many organizations, many countries where this was kind of how it was, but it's become, particularly with the media program and the pan-European funding, this has become much less of an issue than it used to be. But you have elite organizations that are in, because if everyone depends on this money, in the same way that everyone depends on the private money of Hollywood, if everyone depends on the public money of a government film body, then you have elite organizations that express beliefs of a governing class that are not that interested in the market. They're mainly interested in keeping themselves in a job and keeping themselves going. And the appointments are not on merit, but on political thing. When I first went to Australia, I've done a lot of work in Australia over the years. When I first went about 20 years ago, this was a pretty accurate description of what Australia was like. Not completely, but it was quite like this. It's changed a lot over 20 years. But, you know, you had people in jobs there who had been doing the same job for 15 or 20 years. in development. Now, it's a really unhealthy situation. I think it should be a law that in public agencies, for example, that you cannot be in public agency in development for more than 3 years before you move on. You need to churn the executives, because what happens is if you leave an executive in that job, maybe for 4 years, for more than 4 years, they have favorites and they start returning to the people they know because it makes their job easier. And, you know, you start to get a stultifying, a kind of the change, the amount of change and churn stops, and you get the same kind of people making the same kind of projects for the same kind of returns, and you stop the variety and complexity of your industry. So and this is what I first came across in Australia when I first went there. So this is a different kind of system. The decision making is slow because you don't have to make decisions quickly, which means there's a lot of lobbying. It means there's potential for corruption. Sometimes you get corruption. A lot of projects wither away because you simply spend too much time waiting for a decision, and the project just dies while you wait, dies of lack of oxygen. The really smart, creative talents in this area generally get frustrated with this system, and they go looking elsewhere for money and for a way of getting the projects done. You get these interesting kind of renegade kind of filmmakers and storytellers who go and just find different ways of doing it. Years ago, I found 2 Latvians who had made a film. They were in a heavy metal band, and they'd made a film by, they had a radio station, which they bought when the Iron Curtain collapsed. They bought a radio station, they made heavy metal with it. They had a band, they bought a radio station which played only heavy metal music, and then they took that radio station to Coca-Cola and said to Coca-Cola, we will give you free advertising for a year on our station if you give us your Coca-Cola lorries for 2 days, 1 weekend. Coca-Cola said yes. They then bought a cargo of oranges, and they took the Coca-Cola lorries to the docks, and they unloaded the oranges into the Coca-Cola lorries and drove them into Russia and sold the oranges in Russia, where you don't get many oranges in that part of the world. They sold out all the oranges and they made a profit, and with that profit, they made their movie. That's how they funded their film. That's what happens when you have a system that doesn't allow clever, smart people to thrive. They find a way anyway. And this system very often keeps those kinds of people working. What happens in development, though, if you have waiting too long for a decision, people get lazy. Development technique is not good enough, not fast enough. People become suspicious of change, and you get the kind of cultivation of favorites, and you get the inside people and the outside people, and there's a resentment between them. Okay, but if you really want to work in this world and you're good and you believe in yourself, generally, if you keep knocking on the door, you'll get money. No one is going to discourage your ambition because they don't really care about your ambition. You can work at your own pace. The Czech Republic was another place where this kind of work happened, particularly under communism. You know, you had these incredible filmmakers coming out of the Czech Republic because they just kind of found a way to exist in the system. They become very knowledgeable, and they're not embarrassed to talk about art. And it's a system which I think encourages genius by mistake. You know, they don't mean to, but they produce geniuses, and regularly produce geniuses in this system. In a way, I'm a bit sad you don't see many systems like this anymore, because, you know, they used to provide excellent filmmakers. In this system, development executives in the agencies, they administrate. They don't necessarily have much technical skill. They want political patronage and safe, and they're not paid enough. Okay, so it's quite hard being in these jobs anyway. And they're not about risk, these systems. They're oblivious to risk. They don't really know what risk is. Okay, and the success they crave is festivals, international reviews, and an approval of the kind of elite that puts them there in the first place. This is a dying world. It's obviously good that it's a dying world, but in a funny way, I'm slightly nostalgic for it. Then you have a much more complex world, which is the mixed world, which is where we mostly live in Europe, where you have a mixture of public money and private money coexisting together. And it's a really interesting and complex world that has kind of tensions from both sides kind of clashing into each other. And you have different, what they're looking to do with public money is to connect the money, if they can, to private money, i.e. they want to give you money, public money, with some connection somewhere down the line to private money. What they love is, for example, distribution money, or, you know, money from a streamer or whatever it may be, a commitment, that kind of private commitment. They'll also push development processes that bring private money into the system. Slate funding is a system that kind of is easier to get private money into a slate fund than into slated projects than an individual project. They'll look for match funding, which is matching private money, matching public money with private money from outside, connecting public development funds directly to private funds. Sometimes they do this. Low budget initiatives, which is where the public financier can pay for all of the production without having to go to the market and then, as it were, make an experiment themselves in the market, incentivize producers to bring private partners, and in very many cases, try and create, as it were, a private industry by investing public money. And then if the public money makes any profit, giving the profits directly back to the production company. So you're basically trying to create a private industry by investing public profit in private companies. So it's all about pushing the private and the public money together in order, because it's much more efficient if you have the discipline of the market coming into the system early in development, if you can connect the public money with the private money. And you make much more skilled professionals if you do that. On average, public money is, it costs less, invests less per project than private money. Okay, so because public money is often the only game in town, you take what you're given. So the amount you get paid in development is set by the public agency, not by market forces or anything else. There's no competition for the funding, so they can set the price. There aren't many agents often involved in this process, so you don't have professional negotiators. The agencies are looking to spread the money as far as they can with as many projects as they can, so they're not going to try and invest, if they can help it, in limiting the investment too much. And the effect of that is you get the lower quality projects, because if you've got a good enough project to attract private money, you won't go to the public agencies because you get more money from the private agencies. So one of the problems that public agencies have is what they're asked very often is to show the efficiency of their work by their political taskmasters. Show us that the investments you make with this money are worthwhile. Okay, and that, i.e., in development, that is something like, show us how many projects get made given the amount of money you spend on developing projects. And the problem you have, if you have the system where you're kind of setting the rate and you're not wanting to spend too much money, is that the privately funded projects are elsewhere. If you really wanted to be efficient, you would put less money, you put more money in less projects, and you behave like a private financier. But if you do that, you don't spread the money around the industry. And so they're caught in this awkward dilemma with when they're private, there's a competition for talent. You have agents and lawyers. You can be more selective. There are fewer newcomers, and so older, more experienced people are more expensive. And if you pay more money, you lessen the risk. It's not being cheap is not going to lessen the risk. It's going to increase the risk. If you're privately funded, you have a direct connection to the market. You've got that rigor from the market. You've got financial discipline. You have experienced people dealing with you. You'll have a much higher chance of going to production, and you'll get paid more. If you're the problems of private development funding is that they're always looking for bigger projects. So smaller projects don't really exist easily. You are dealing with writing talent that's living on a reputation. You're going to have to work with people who've already done quite a lot. It's difficult for newcomers to work in this system. And quite often, a lot of those people who've done a lot of work are actually not very good because they're past their peak and they're kind of they're phoning it in. So you're going to work out who are the people that are really worth working. And if you're working with public money in partnership, the private money will bully the public money because they don't really need it. The benefits of public money, I've talked about the problems: stability, continuity. It's where young people learn how to do this. They're obliged to risk. They're obliged to have a relationship with new talent. They're obliged to think about diversity. And it sets the minimum size of your development economy. Because at the very least, there is this organization in this country spending this much on development. That's the bottom line. That's how much money there is at a minimum on development. And from that, knowing that, you can kind of build an industry around that. And you can work out the size of the industry. You can work out how big it's going to be. The problems of public development are there's limited resources. They're not looking at individual projects. The executives aren't that experienced. It's cumbersome in administration. And most of all, it's a permission culture. You have an idea for a story, you take it to an organization. If they say no, it doesn't get made. If they say yes, it does get made. You're asking them for permission to make your story. It's a permission culture, and that's not a healthy system. So trying to get away from a permission culture is one of the things that public development organizations need to be thinking about. When you put these two kinds of money together, you get certain kinds of problems. The public money tends to bend over for the private money. So all the things that a good public organization will say about being rigorous and careful about how they spend the money. Get a big financier coming in, a big studio or a streamer or someone, they'll go, oh, it doesn't matter, just give them the money. We so want to be in bed with these people, it doesn't matter what they do to us. And so when the private money knows that, we'll come in and say, okay, we get all our money out before you get any of your money out. If there's any profit, we get all of it. You don't get any of it. They have these kinds of demands. The public money goes, oh yeah, absolutely, whatever you want. So they get taken advantage of. What happens is the private sector in this situation, they quite often let the public sector do the work. So they say the agency will take care of the story development, and they don't get as involved as they normally would in the story development. And as a result, the story suffers. Technically, again, they can relax too much, and they're in the system in order to exploit this public system, and they don't understand what the public system wants out of the project and the development, and they don't care. And in the private sector, the desire for being paid is what drives development decisions. Quite often, if we go to this next stage, then we trigger a payment. And so very often the decision to go to the next stage in the project is not because that's the right thing to do at this moment, it's because the producer gets a fee if at that moment we move to the next stage. So for example, we say, is this first draft finished, or is this third draft finished? And the producer goes, yeah, of course it's finished, because when it's finished, I put an invoice for my third draft fee payment. And that's what drives the decision, not is it really finished? Are we in the right place? So the money pushes the creative decision to one side, and that can be a problem. There are three systems, if you like. There's this all private Hollywood, a mixture of private and public, which is we call European, and this kind of renegade, kind of disconnected system, which I'm calling Australian, but it's not fair on the Australians because actually it's much better than that now, but it's kind of used to be. We don't live in one or other of these systems. All countries are a blend of these different systems. And the more successful you become as a filmmaker or a TV producer, TV writer, the more you move up from almost entirely public and a bit of a mess to public and private blends to finally all private. And that, as we climb up that development ladder, is an indicator for you of success. You want to know if you're doing well in terms of development is actually where is your money coming from. If your money is all coming from private sources, you're doing really well. You're kind of on the top tier. And every country in Europe has these layers of development, and you make your way up these layers as your career kind of develops. Okay, that's the first part of the talk. We'll stop there.
Okay, and let's have a 10-minute break. And please prepare your questions because, Stephen, their final assignment for this class, we don't have an exam, but they have to fill out and submit to me a media development application.
Oh, okay, excellent.
So prepare questions and let's get back in 10 minutes. Okay.
All right, great.
Bye now.
Bye.
Of this presentation lecture by Stephen Cleary. So, Stephen.
Okay. So, do we have 50 minutes now? How much time do we have? Just let me. Are we going through? Because we started a little bit late.
No,
are we going to go through?
We have to be done by 8.
Okay.
So good. Let's just keep 10 minutes at the end for questions or discussion.
So we have like 35 minutes. Okay. Well, we're going to zip on then. The second part of what I wanted to talk about is moving away from the systems and economics and things. We're talking about it from the creative perspective and thinking about story development from that perspective. Hang on, I'm going to make my slides work because it doesn't seem to work. We've already defined development as this business of getting a story into the right shape in its scripting and financing and marketing elements so that we get the story to the audience in the way that we want it to do. And it must make commercial sense. We're making a story for an industrial marketplace. So even though we have a story to tell and we have creative concerns, at the same time, it has to make sense in an economic context of the industry we work in. And we therefore need to understand that what we're trying to do is we're trying to tell the story in the way that we want to tell it, creatively, at the same time, using the economic context of the industry to reach the audience that we want. So it's blending these different needs and requirements. It's a collaborative process, and it always involves a core creative team. And in that team, in different combinations, will nearly always be a producer, a writer, a director, and a developer. Now, that developer doesn't have to be a separate person. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you'll have someone from an agency or from a company that will have an executive who will have the responsibility to develop. But if there isn't that person, then there is, as it were, and there isn't a, for example, you can use someone like me. Sometimes people come and they find someone as a freelancer and they bring in a consultant to do some development work with the team. But if those people aren't in it, then the team does it themselves. That you are each all a developer. So you have to have a different hat on when you are a developer in your team as you are when you're a producer, whatever. You're looking at the story from a development perspective. Okay, so it's the key team that we're interested in, and that team is the kind of the driving team that makes everything happen. So when you start thinking about this, then you think about the process this team is involved in. You're doing two things, and these two things are, one is that we're inside the other. You're developing the story always, so you're moving the story forward, but you're also always developing the project. The producer has the ultimate responsibility for developing the project, but developing the story is a part of developing the project, and there will be things that have to happen in the project development that come out of realizations that you make in the story development. You might, for example, have a discussion about whether or not we change that character from a man into a woman. Now that has big implications for the casting, obviously. So that changes the nature of the project, not just the story, but the project itself, because suddenly you're not looking for an actor, you're looking for an actress. And how many actresses are there in the industry you're working that would be suitable, that would bring the finance, etc. So a story decision, change the character, has big implications in the project overall. So there's always a feed between the two areas. Both activities go on all the time. You're always developing the story, you're always developing the project. Most of the story development happens in the earlier stages, and the project develops more, but the story slows down its development the closer you get, as it were, to production, even though there's always story development going on. What you're doing in story development is you're making what you have on the page clear and coherent and agreed. And once you have that clear, coherent, agreed story, then that defines the project. It tells you what kind of project it is, it tells you what kind of audience it has, which in turn tells you how much money might be available to make this project, which in turn tells you how much money might be available to develop this project. And those things, once they're set in the story, start affecting the nature of the project itself. So one of the things you have to do in the process of developing the story is make sure the story you're developing is kind of compatible, makes sense in the context of the industry that you're working in, and as well your notion of the project. So the producer's job is to kind of marry what the writer might want to have to happen in the story with their idea of where the audience for the story is and how the thing is going to get made in the first place, and make sure that they're doing the right thing, so that it's definitely a feature you're making and not a TV series, or definitely a TV series and not a feature film. Make sure that it's not a short film. You think you've got a feature, but in fact, and this is much more common than you would think, the story will be better told in 25 minutes than it would in a feature film. So these kind of questions, you have to work these things out and get them right. Because again, if you don't get these answers right and properly worked out early on, then the project will not make it all the way through. Okay, so, and as I said, again, you're going to spend a lot of time in development, so you need to get this right, particularly if you're a producer. And in particular, it's your main creative activity for all of you, writer, director, producer. Mainly, you spend more time being creative in development than you will in production, post-production, and elsewhere. It's just a fact. So people tend to underestimate this, particularly directors and producers. They tend not to realize this. And those producers and directors who are really good at development are the people who get more projects made. That's the truth of it. That's why, you need to be really giving time and effort to understanding and exploring your kind of skills. Projects don't fail because the story doesn't work. Projects fail because the team doesn't work. The most important issues in development are not story issues. What the most important issues are relationships. If you don't get the relationship with the team right, then the project will fail irrespective of what the story is. And this happens again and again and again. So you need to spend a lot of time managing and, as you were, casting the team, if you're the producer, casting the writer and director against each other, casting the team together, and then managing the team to make sure that everything is moving smoothly. If it goes well and the team is managed well, you have a good chance of success. If it's not managed well, you don't. irrespective in some ways of the quality of the story. This is the thing to understand. It's not just the story. You know, what you're doing all the time in development is learning. You're always, each project is different. Each project will set you different creative problems. Each time you solve them, you'll learn something. Each time you move forward, you realize you're in a better space. And if you get the answers right, and if you learn properly, you move forward. And if you don't, you die. Okay. And the thing to understand about development is it's supposed to be hard. Okay, it's not supposed to be easy. Development is the way the industry works out whether you're good enough. You know, because most people who set out in development give up eventually, 2 or 3 years, 4 years, and they leave the industry, or they go into a different area of the industry. You know, they go and get a better paid job somewhere else, or, you know, and that's fine, because we don't want those people, because they're the people that give up. You know, what we want are the people who keep going and learn and get better. So development is kind of like, in some sense, there's a set of hurdles that are put up for young professionals that you have to jump over these hurdles in order to get onto the field properly. And if you fail, that's okay, because there'll be other people behind you. They'll come and some of them will jump over. You know, and so development isn't supposed to be easy, and you're going to be confronted with failure often, and you're going to have to deal with failure. And if you can't deal with failure, you'll leave, and that'll be fine, because someone else will come. It's brutal and it's unfair and it's biased against certain kinds of people. So certain kinds of people find it harder to work in this area than others. Certain kinds of characters in stories find it harder to get noticed. Certain kinds of stories find it harder. And wherever you go in the world, you have different industries which have kind of biases against certain kinds of stories. Like you go to some places that just don't make horror films. When I was working in the UK, I would say in my office to every writer that came into my office, I'm looking for a musical. If you walk in with a musical, I'll give you the money to write it. I don't even care what it is. I've been here for 3 years and nobody has ever brought me a musical. Okay. And I don't know why we don't make musicals in this country, but we just don't. So write a musical. No one ever wrote a musical. No one ever went, oh, that's interesting. I can get some easy money. I'll just write a musical. They just weren't interested. So, you know, writers, good luck to them. They write what they want to write, but producers, no producer said, oh, I wonder if I could write a musical, you know. And so for years, this was years ago, nobody in the UK was making musicals. I couldn't pay people to write me a musical. They just didn't want to. So certain stories in certain countries just don't go. They just don't survive. It's unfair, but it's the way it is. Every project in development is going to teach you something. Every project you have, the question is not, you know, can you be taught something? The question is, are you going to learn? Well, are you smart enough to understand that you'll learn, and understand that if you don't learn, you'll fail? I've talked about this already. Develop the story, develop the project, that gets you forward. In order to develop the project, one of the skills you need, and one of the things you really have to understand, is the process of working with screenwriters. Some of you listening may be screenwriters and you'll know this anyway. But if you're not a writer, or you want to work with writers, even if you're co-writing, this is also worth thinking about. There is a few things to understand about working with writers. A lot of people say that writers, screenwriters are not really professional. They can be sloppy and they can be lazy and whatever. I don't think that's true. I think it's just that writers are difficult to understand if you don't come from the writer's world. Most writers, in my experience, spend a lot of time in their life as writers not writing, you know, washing the kitchen floor, you know, getting the car out and taking the car to pieces, going for a long walk with the dog, digging the garden. They spend a lot of time not writing. And then suddenly when they write very fast. And very often producers say to me, why is it that writers, you give them 3 months to write a script and they deliver a week late? Always, always. Like, you know, you say, okay, you've got 3 months and here's the money. And then a week before the script is due in, they say, I need a few more days. And then they give it to you and it's like a week later or 8 days later. And he said, and it's not like one writer, most writers do this. You know, it's like really, for a producer, it's like, why can't they, you know, start work a week earlier and then get it right? What they don't think about is that maybe writers have to put themselves under pressure in order to write well. And this is particularly true of younger writers. Most young writers, not very experienced writers, deliver late. And they deliver late because they create a sense of panic in themselves. And then that kind of heightened environment, that's how they write. If you say to them, start writing now, you've got 2 months before you deliver. So write the scenes now. They can't write. They simply can't do it because they don't feel the kind of the creative urge, as it were. And very often with young writers, that creative urge is also guilt and panic. And they kind of create this weird environment where they don't work for so long. They feel really bad about not working. They keep beating themselves up saying, why didn't I do any work today? And I didn't really get anywhere. And then suddenly the deadline looms and it looks like they can't make it. And then they race and then they write. That's the process. That's simply what they do. And if you're a producer and you're smart, you give them a delivery date, which is 2 weeks before you really need it. And then they race and you don't tell them actually it's okay. And then they give you the script 3 days before you really wanted it. And that's what a good producer will do. They'll create that kind of barrier because a young writer will tend to do that. It's a peculiar business. It's a peculiar thing to be a writer. It's very strange when you think about it. What a writer does is, particularly an original writer, they sit down somewhere and they have some paper and they create something out of nothing. That's what writing is. It's alchemy. It's you create, and that thing they create, if you're J.K. Rowling, you sit in a cafe in Scotland and you create Harry Potter. That thing she created is worth billions and billions and billions of euros. And she sat in a cafe and she made it from nothing. And she made billions of euros out of thin air. And that's what every writer does. They make things out of thin air. So, you can't judge them by straightforward standards. It's a peculiar practice. It's a peculiar thing. Most writers that I know would write even if they weren't paid. They just have to write. They have an urge to write. And they find a way that they can make it into a living for themselves. Most writers find the people around them think what they do is a bit peculiar and a bit strange. And most writers I work with don't think they're very good writers. Even very successful writers don't really think they're very good. They think that one day someone's going to find them out. They're not particularly secure people. So it's an interesting and complex person you're dealing with. And then we think about development. And then you think, the complexities of development itself. And the thing I've already talked about, a couple of things to remember. Anyone thinks they could be a good developer because they can read. Okay, this is generally what people think. If I can read, I can have an opinion on a script. You can have an opinion on a script, and that opinion is going to be rubbish most of the time. Okay, so just because someone can read and they can have an opinion does not mean they're a developer. It just means there's someone with an opinion on the script. My grandmother can read. My grandmother will have an opinion on a script. Whether I will ever let my grandmother's opinion meet the writer is a different question. Okay, so it's just because you can read and you can have an opinion doesn't mean you can develop. Okay, it's not that easy. Okay, it's totally wrong. And writers are damaged constantly by people who think this, by executives, by distributors, by anyone who just goes, oh, I've read the script, I'll tell them what I think. Most writers will be polite and not tell you that what you're talking is total nonsense. Okay, they will make a face that they're quite used to making, which is, this is the face I make when someone is talking to me about my work and I'm not interested in it, but I don't want to be rude, and those opinions will be unformed and not very useful. Okay. Secondly, even if you are quite smart at thinking about stories and understanding them, having a view on the story, knowing what you think about a story and expressing what you think to a writer is not development. That's not what you do in development. Say, okay, well, look, I'm really good with stories. I'm really smart. I know stuff. I've read your story. This is what you need to know. That's not developing. That's not helping the story get written better, which is what we're talking about in terms of working with writers, is how do we help the writer write better? Okay, and just telling them what they're doing wrong is not the process. Okay, so there's a first rule to understand if you're working with a writer, which is a story isn't good because you like it. Okay, and it's not bad because you don't like it. Your opinion on the story is of very little interest to anyone. Okay, that's not the question you should be asking. Do I like it? Okay, who cares whether you like it? That's not the question in development. The question is, does the story work? Okay, that's a very different question. And your opinion on the story, whether you like it or not, is of no interest to anyone. So first of all, just get that into your head. If you're going to work with a writer, what you think of the script is not important. It's whether the script works, how the script works, and how you can work on that script together to make it work better is what you're asking about in development. Okay, it's not a business of telling the writer what you think about their work. Okay, and if you think that's what development is, you're simply in the wrong place. You need to rethink completely what you're doing. So what does a writer want? Okay. The problem with development is writers need to know if the story is working. Okay, and that's what they want. When a writer gives someone else the script, they want an outside opinion Okay, they want to know whether the story works. Now, what they get is an opinion, but it's not a story about, it's not an opinion about it working. They just get an opinion. What the writer thinks they get giving the story to someone else is an objective opinion. I want an objective view of my script. What they often get is a subjective view of the script. This is what I think about it, not is it okay, does it work? And the question about does it work is about measuring the script against a set of technical criteria. You know, it's not about, you know, it's the difference. It's like architecture. When you give the blueprints of a building to someone, okay, if you're an architect, if you give it to your mechanical engineer or your foreman who's, you know, going to actually make the thing, okay, you don't want the foreman or the mechanical engineer or the civil engineer to go, oh, your blueprint is very pretty. It's very nicely laid out. You know, your drawing is lovely. What you want them to say is, if I build this building, it won't fall over. That's what you want them to say. But what you want them to say is, you can't do that. If you do that with your building plans and we actually build that, then that corner of the building will in 2 years collapse, because for these reasons. It's a technical conversation about the design of the building. And development, when you're talking to a screenwriter, is a technical conversation about the design of the story. Now, it's couched in very different terms than an architect and an engineer would talk about, but it's the same kind of conversation. So imagine you get the script, okay? They want your opinion. So the writer says, you don't like the ending. That's your opinion. So you say, I don't like the ending. And the writer goes, okay, you don't like the ending. Well, neither do I. I think you're right. I'll change it. Okay, so if you've done that, if you have that conversation, is that a good thing? Have you done well? Is that a good process of development? You know, by telling the writer you don't like the ending? Because, you know, you say, well, if I tell the writer they didn't like the ending and they go, yeah, well, I don't like it either. And then they say, you're right. And they go off to rewrite the ending. Surely that's a good thing. And I would say, well, how do you know what they do next will be any better? And the answer you have to give me is, I don't know if it will be any better. And then I would say, well, why have you told them you don't like the ending? If the result of the conversation is they go off and rewrite the ending, and you can't tell me now, having had that conversation, that what they're going to do is going to make it any better. So what you have to say is, it could make it worse, couldn't it? And you'd have to go, yeah, it could make it worse. So I was okay, so what we've done here, we've had a conversation where you've told the writer you don't like the ending, and they've said, yes, I agree with you. And then they've gone off to rewrite it. And this is what will happen. Either it will get better, or it won't get any better, or it will get worse. And you can't tell me now which of those things will happen. So why did you have that conversation? Why did you open your mouth? Because if it gets better, it's going to be through luck. It's not because you did anything good. You know, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of it getting better. You've got a 2 in 3 chance of it not getting any better or even getting worse. Okay, so that conversation about I don't like the ending has got you nowhere. And it's probably got you to waste time. It might, if you're lucky, get you somewhere, but it probably won't. You've probably wasted time by saying that. It's a bit more complicated than just saying, I don't like it. What you've done when you say I don't like the ending is express an opinion. Okay, and if you don't know that the expression of an opinion will result in the project getting better, then why would you ever express an opinion? Just because you have an opinion. You know, it's more complicated than this. The process is more complicated. The writer wants an objective opinion, but you've given the subjective opinion. You know, you've said the ending doesn't work, but you don't know why it doesn't work. You haven't worked out, or you haven't thought about the way that endings normally work and how this ending relates to other endings that you know in other stories, and technically how you construct an ending in the various different ways. Okay, what the writer is asking you when they give you the script, they're not asking you for your opinion. What they want to know really is, does the story work? That's the question they're asking. Does it work? And in order to answer the question, does a story work, you have to know about stories. Okay, you can't make this up. You can't, it's not an opinion. You have to be able to answer these questions before you even work with these people. What is a story? What is it? What's it for? How do stories work? How do all stories work, on the broadly speaking? Then, once you know the answer to those questions, what is this story? What kind of story is it? How do these kinds of stories work? Okay, what are 5 examples of other stories that are like this story, that are constructed in the same way, that have the same principles underneath them? You know, what is this story for? You know, and that's a difficult and complicated question. What is it for? Who is it for? The audience? What is it trying to do to that audience? What is the objective of the story? You know, and how does it technically work? That's the final question. That's the question that actually you can base your development on. How does this particular story of this particular kind work? And is it working properly? And if it isn't, what do we have to do to make it better? Okay, now the answer, of course, is you don't have to do anything. What you have to do is find a way of getting the writer to make it better. Your job is not to make the story better. Your job is to make the writer be able to write the story better. That's what you're doing in development. So being smart about the technical aspects of the story is a requirement. You know, you have to be able to answer that question. This is how these stories work. That's why, that's the kind of discipline part of the process. That's the technical part of the process. And that's half of what you need to know, the technical half of story development. The other side is the kind of emotional, intuitive part. Because as I said before, developing a story is not simply like doing a crossword. It's not a straightforward technical process. It also involves emotion and emotional involvement. And it involves it in different ways. And you have to understand, first, you are both developing a story which is intended to engage an audience emotionally. If you're going to do that, develop a story like that, you have to assess how the emotion in the story is working. And the only way you can assess it is by comparing how it works on you, on the people in the team together working. So you have to, as it were, emotionally relate to the material you're doing. So you're going to be involving your own emotions in this process of assessing the quality of the story. And secondly, you're going to be writing the script, or you're going to be working with someone who is writing the script in development. For the writer, the process of writing is also emotional. Understanding the writer, how they work, the pressures they're under, their motives, requires kind of sensitivity and a psychological acuity, a psychological sharpness, because you have to understand what makes them tick. And different writers work in different ways. Some writers need and like a detailed critique of their work. So they deliver a draft, for example, and what they want and what they respond to is 6 pages of detailed notes, where you literally go through and carefully make a page of notes. Other writers want 2 sentences. And if you give them 6 pages of notes, they will not respond to it. They will pay attention to the notes and they will try and do what you say, but they won't do it very well because they don't really know how to do it. Okay. But if you say to them, I mean, my favorite personal experience of this is I had a good friend who I worked with for years, a writer. And then finally he delivered, a film was made, he delivered a script and it was really great. You know, we'd been working on it for a long time and he delivered the draft and it was really great until about 8 pages from the end. And then the ending was just, it just kind of fell off a cliff. It was awful. It just was so exciting and so good and so interesting. And then suddenly the ending came, literally about 6 pages from the end, you just felt the story fall away. And I was at home reading it because he dropped it off at my office and I took it straight home. He knew I would take it straight home to read it because we were so excited about the project. And he waited until about 10 o'clock at night and he phoned me up and said, what do you think? Because he knew I would read it at home. And I knew he was going to phone me. And I was sitting at home thinking about this script, thinking, why is it, what happens to make it go so wrong when it works so right for so long in the script? And I thought, what do I tell him? What do I say? What do I say? And then he phoned and I picked up the phone and he said, what did you think? And I said, I think it's really, really great. I think it's really working well, except the ending. And I thought, what do I say to him now? How do I technically explain it? And then I just said, I think you could write this better. And that's what I said. And he said, thanks. And he put the phone down. And 4 days later, he brought in the new draft and the ending was fantastic, completely worked. All he needed, he didn't need a technical explanation. That particular writer needed someone to say, I think you could be better. You know, and the thing is, if I'd have said, what you need to do is this, or what you need to do is that, he might have done that because he respected my opinion. He thought, well, I'll try to do what he says. But he wouldn't have written the ending he gave. The ending he came with was better than anything I could have thought of. So if he was, as it were, listening to me too much, he wouldn't have been able to come up with the ending that was the right ending for him. And part of the skill in development is allowing the writer the space to be themselves. Like some writers, as I say, need detailed notes in order to be themselves. Some writers need a very light touch to be themselves. And that also changes in the course of the evolution of a project. Sometimes at the beginning, you need to be heavy on the notes. And then at the end, you lighten up. Sometimes at the beginning, you need to be light on the notes. And then at the end, you're heavy. And it depends on your assessment of the writer. So you have to watch the writer and understand how they work and how they feel and get a feeling for it. This is kind of emotional sensitivity to the writer as part of the process of development. And of course, it always involves emotional transactions. That's the other thing to understand about a writer. Like I said, any story, any question to a good writer about a story is a personal question, because they are personally committed to the stories they write. They're emotionally difficult for them to do. It's a big emotional process for a writer. So any question you ask them about their story is something they will take personally. So if you ask 50 questions in a row, it's just hard for them. It doesn't matter even what the questions are. It's just each time you ask a question, they have to dig in themselves a little bit in order to answer. And it can become quite difficult for them to do that. So you have to, again, watch a writer when you're talking to them and understand that, first of all, the amount of time you can have in a meeting with a writer is going to be limited. The number of things you can talk about in any one meeting are going to be limited, you know, and you have to watch the writer carefully, because you can see them, if you watch them carefully enough, you'll see them just stop in a meeting. You'll just see them go, and you go, that's it, they're full. You know, they can't do anything else, you know, and sometimes that will be 2 hours, sometimes it'll be half an hour. You would hope that your relationship with the writer is good enough that the writer will say, I can't do this anymore. I have to stop. We have to come back another day. But most writers, if they're trying to impress you, I used to have a job where I had a lot of money. I was giving money to development. So every writer who came into my office knew that if things went well, they would go away with money. I mean, not that day, I didn't have a big box under my table, but, you know, we would make a contract and they would get money. So every conversation I had with the writer is thinking partly, if this goes well, I'll get paid. Or if this goes well, they'll pay me for a new draft, because every time. So the writers very often wouldn't say, would you mind if we stop talking now? Because I don't think I can concentrate anymore. I'm full. Because they were frightened that if they said that, particularly young writers, that I would, you know, take offense. I would say, oh, you know, this writer's not the kind of person I want, you know what I mean? And that would damage their chances. So I had to be really aware and really concentrate at looking at the writer to judge the point where I go, okay, that's enough of the meeting. We're going to stop talking now. You know, we've said enough. You go away and think about what we said and then come back with some new work and blah, blah, blah. You have to be really sensitive to that. Otherwise, you know, if I like the story, I could talk about it for 3 hours. You know, and the poor writer is sitting there kind of beaten up, you know, and not really listening anymore. And, you know, so you have to be sensitive to every individual writer and the individual way that they respond to kind of work, and be very careful with it, you know, because, as I said, for them, it's a series of personal questions. And, you know, often you have to kind of create a relationship with the writer, which is about passing secrets to each other, because you're kind of telling them, when you ask a writer about a story, you're kind of saying, tell me something special about something that you know, because that's what a story is. It's a writer's particular view of the world. So their special view. So you're saying, tell me about your story, tell me about your story. You're kind of saying, tell me about yourself, tell me about yourself, tell me about yourself. And that hurts. Often what's useful in this conversations like this is to give the writer information about yourself, is to give them something back. So you say, okay, I've asked you lots of questions about myself, and then I'll tell them something about myself in a conversation. So it's interesting, this scene in your script, because it reminds me, when I was a kid, this happened to me. And I tell them a little story about myself. And it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. But that is me saying, okay, now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you something of me. And then when that finishes, I'll say, can you give me something back? And they give it back to you. The energy comes back in the conversation because they've been given something out and they've rested, and you've given them something, and then they give you something back, and you start exchanging. The conversation becomes a series of exchanges, and that's really important in the development conversation. It's emotional transactions. You're giving some of yourself, they're giving some of their self, and that backwards and forwards. A really good development conversation feels like that. It's like a really good conversation in friendship. The thing to be careful about, it's not friendship. You know, it's a professional conversation which uses techniques that people who are friends use all the time, telling each other about things that have happened to each other. They're having discussions about this. It looks like, from the outside sometimes, like a conversation between two friends, but they're not your friends. They're just writers. You know, and you've got to be careful in this job that if you're doing development job a lot of the time, you know, when the project moves forward, they leave. You know, and that conversation is over, and that deep and intimate discussion like friends that you had over hours, over one project over 6 months or 2 years, that finishes, and they go off to their careers and you go off to yours. And don't make the mistake of thinking they're your friends. They might become your friends in different situations, but even though that conversation looks like a conversation between friends when it goes well, it's not a conversation between friends. It's a conversation between professionals using the techniques of friendship. And you've got to be really clear about the difference, otherwise you can get, difficult. W.B. Yeats, the Irish poet, said about poetry and writing poetry, "I will place myself where all ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart." That's W.B. Yeats. And that's kind of what development is about. It's about these kind of questions. Why am I a producer? Why do I want to do this? Why do I direct? Why do I want to write? Why does this writer want to write? You need to understand yourself and why you're doing it, and understand the people you're working with and why they're doing it before you can do any really good work about the project you're working on. You have to understand the kind of the emotional complexity of what you're doing. You need technical expertise, you need understanding of group dynamics, you need sensitivity and an intuitive insight while you deal with all those emotions, and you need business skills if you're on the production side. And you start by using your knowledge of yourself to understand where you are, what you're trying to do, why this project, and how you're going to get it made. That self-knowledge, which is at the bottom of it all, is what you have to start with if you're going to be working with screenwriters and directors, and indeed producers if you're standing outside the project working with them. I think that's where we'll stop. There's a little bit more in the notes, but you will have the notes to look at on the slides later. But I think it gives enough time for questions if we need questions, if you have questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And just a question, can we upload your PowerPoint presentation in the platform? Thank you very much.
Sorry.
So you will all have the chance and the opportunity to go over whatever Steve said. And I think you've said it all, but if there are any questions, we would be very happy to hear them and try to answer them. Anyone?
You don't have to, it's fine. It's just if
Okay, so I think that was a lot. So the floor is yours again, Stephen, to close this very, very interesting and useful session.
Okay, well, I just want to just say that it's really the balance between, as it were, your technical understanding and the knowledge of the industry you're in. That's on the one side of things. On the other side of things is a kind of an emotional sensitivity. And those are two, on the surface, very different aspects of yourself, that you're dealing with, this kind of your analytic and business side of things, and then your emotional, intuitive responses to story. You have to understand that development is a place where you kind of have to bring those two things together, and you have to kind of balance them. And if you're good at one thing, and people tend to have a natural bias, you might be naturally good at the intuitive, emotional stuff, or you might be naturally good at the business analytic stuff. You have to work hard on what you're not good at. So bearing in mind that it's the balance of the two, that it's not enough to be a really great development person with writers. It's not enough to be the person that writers really love to talk to, because that's great and that's really good, but you also have to understand, the business context of the industry you're in. How do I get money for this? Who do I go to? What kind of things do they want? What will they be expecting? How do I get the writer to produce documents that fit the requirements of these people? How do these kind of documents work? All those questions, and an awareness of how your industry is moving and developing. All those business and industrial questions have to be balanced at the same time with the intuitive side. And it's kind of producers, this is what producing is. It's a balancing these various aspects of yourself. So if you're a producer and you feel you're not very good at development, then just work hard at it. You have to dedicate yourself to the time. You can't really fake it. You can't get someone in, an executive or a freelancer like me. In some sense, it's like, it's putting a finger in the hole for a while. Those people won't stay there. Eventually they go, and when they take their fingers out, the water comes in the hole again, like being in a boat. So you have to learn how to do this work yourself. There are a lot of very good people out there who will help you, so do dedicate the time, and I think you'll find it's worth it. The better you are at development, the better you are at everything else. That's the truth of it. If you're good at development,
There's-
everything else comes easy.
There's a question from Professor Irini Staffing. Can you wait here?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to talk on behalf of the students, actually, because we are in a particular condition in Greece. The production system is not so developed or doesn't work so strictly like in countries like in the States or in UK, and especially for our students who the most of times they work as directors of their projects, writers and producers as well. What can advise these people how they can combine all those qualities in order to make a good project?
I think, particularly for writer-directors, I would say be careful of blending those two aspects of the work together and saying, well, it's kind of okay because I'm the director, I don't have to be as rigorous in the scripting and in the working out of the idea, because later on I'll be able to work that kind of stuff out. I think it's quite tough being a writer-director because you tend to take shortcuts in the development of the writing in particular. And if you do, you get yourself into trouble when you're in production or close to production. So I think you have to be, one advice I would say is, okay, when you're writing, you're writing. When you're directing, you're directing. And those two things are very different. And don't think because you're a director, you don't have to worry as much about the writing as if you were only a writer. I think you should approach the project with the perspective in the writing that you are not the director, that you have to make the script work. And you don't go, well, I'll find a way of sorting that out, or I don't have to be completely precise because I know what I think. I know what I mean here. That, I think, is a mistake. So I'd say be clear and disciplined. In the same way, if you're your own producer, okay, it's hard, but you have a story you want to tell that you like, okay? Ask a really good question. Why will anyone else like this? Okay, and you're not allowed to say in the answer, because I like it. It's not a permissible answer. Okay, why will anyone else like it? What does it have that makes it interesting? Okay, and then if you think you know what it is, go and ask someone else, go and find someone and tell them the story and say, do you find that interesting? And if they say yes, they say, why is it interesting? And see if the reason they think it's interesting is the same reason that you thought they would find it interesting, and see if you're right. Because very often you are and very often you aren't. So, be rigorous about it is one of the things I would say.
So we have another question from Olga.
Hi, Olga.
Hi, Olga.
I have to, did I unmute? Yes, I did unmute myself. I'm not sure if you can see me because it's very dark here.
Yes, we can.
Okay, you can.
Okay. Steve, I have a very different question. It's not actually related to Greece. Although I am now in Greece, I split my time between UK and Greece. If I want to find a development producer in a completely new territory, say from cold calling production companies, what else can I do? Because for instance, I'm a writer, so I have a project, a TV series that I want to develop in Latin America because it's set entirely in Latin America. Does it make any sense to approach production companies in the UK as a way in? Do I just cold call Mexican companies or LATAM companies? And the same question actually goes for Greece, but in Greece, I know people, so it's easier,
I would always say to writers who are thinking about approaching producers that the really important thing is to give is to know the producer's work, so that when you approach them, you can say, the reason I'm approaching you is this. I'm a writer, I've got this project, and I think I'd like to talk to you about whether you're interested in being a producer for it. And the reason you, as opposed to any other producer, is this. And that answer, that response you give them is like a detailed, I've seen the work that you've done, knowing the work that you've done as I do, and knowing this project as I do, I think this aspect of this project seems to be the kind of thing that you would be interested in. And that's why I thought of you. So that I think that doesn't get you anywhere apart from it makes the producer go, oh, hang on a second, this person's done their homework. You know, this is a serious, this person's not just going, oh, I've got a project, I've got to find a producer, I'll open up a directory and send it to 15 different people.
Oh,
You know, that they're chosen in that way. That's a good point. Now, whether or not that gets you, the
it
question
doesn't
is,
usually, that's the thing.
Yeah,
Because
whether
if you don't have a production company attached and you're like a complete outsider.
It's difficult because, you know, it also depends on what you're sending them, of course. If you're sending them like, you know, 6 pages or something, then it's, you know, one thing. If you send them a script, will they read the entire script is another, you know, on spec. It's difficult. And it's difficult without the relationship. You know, if it wasn't Mexico, if it was Greece, I'd say, fine, it's Greece, it's okay. You know, if you're in the UK, for example, get on a plane, go to Thessalonica or go to a festival where there's lots of producers, go and meet them, get to know them, you know, and that way you can, you know, you can have meetings and you can find those people that you just click with, that you think, oh, wow, we kind of got on well. And that's how you do it, really. In Mexico, it's harder because they're on the other side of the world, in which case, you know, I wouldn't normally say to a writer, go to Cannes, for example, because it's expensive and a very depressing experience for most writers. But, you know, if you can find a place where, you know, if there's a Latin American festival in Europe somewhere, you know, where you know there'll be some Mexican producers, or even get over there, that's better. Actually meeting them before you're going, as it were, cold calling, is just saying, can I have a coffee? Or, you know, I mean, for example, a festival like Rotterdam, where you do get films from all over the world, projects from all over the world, you will find, you know, half a dozen Mexican producers there. That's a good place. Something like Rotterdam. Cannes is difficult, but Rotterdam is a much more working place, or Berlin, you know, where you can actually find these people and make introductions. It's a long-winded, difficult, and not by any means guaranteed process. But that, I would say, is a better idea about meeting people and talking to them and then saying, and here's the work, can I send it to you? Than I think sending stuff cold. I think it gives you some kind of chance, I think.
Yeah, I tried that with BFI, meeting people at the BFI first. But then what happens once they kind of realize that I don't have a big company behind me? I approach very high level sort of production companies from Latin America, which did amazing work, which is why I got in touch with them. But then you have no reply. This is before I even send anything, you know. You don't get a reply. Oh yeah, email me and let's talk about it, and that's it, literally, you know. They don't even know what the project is about.
You need to catch the producers at a lower level than that, though. I think, though, if you're, you know, I don't think you can go for the big established producers, because why would they? If you think about it from their perspective, they're living in the countries they live in, they're quite successful, they've got endless contacts in those countries, they've got high level contacts with the producers and big companies, you know, around the world. Why would they give themselves the difficulty of working with an unknown writer? If it was me, I could, you know, it's easier to work with someone else they already know, and with people, you know what I mean? For them, it's a big, you're asking them to, the only reason they do that is because they love your material. You know, they absolutely fall in love with it. Well, if they do that, you've got to get the material in front of them, and, you know, you're kind of relying on not just them liking it, but loving it. And that's, you know, it's a long shot, you know, it's like a 1 in 50. So in some sense, what you want to get is the producers at a lower level, who have made like 1 or 2 things that are getting European exposure, for example, and they're going to lower level festivals and they're still on the way up. Those are the producers you probably want to be getting to, not the most established ones, because there's no reason they would work with you. You know, you might be great, but there's lots of other great people they can work with. That's their attitude. So you want to be down a level, I think, is where you need to be.
Actually, on May 3rd, same hour, we have another lecture, another presentation by a visiting professor named Carol Colmenares, and she's Latin American, Emmy awarded twice, Grammy awarded, and she's active in New York, but also in Colombia, where she's coming from. So if you want to attend the session at the same time again on May 3rd.
She'd probably have a better answer than me. Yeah.
Definitely.
So if there aren't any other questions, I think we are done. Thank you again very, very much, Stephen, and thank you, Ollie. students and everybody who attended this session, this very useful session. It's gonna be uploaded in the platform. So have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.